Today's show is brought to you by Granulate, an Intel company, and their new offering, gMaestro. gMaestro allows you to reduce your Kubernetes costs by up to 60% with autonomous, continuous workload, and pod right-sizing. With gMaestro, you gain full visibility into your Kubernetes clusters and eliminate over-provisioning without compromising performance or affecting your competitive SLAs. gMaestro can be installed with a single line of code and provides visibility into inefficiencies within your Kubernetes clusters. Users can automatically apply HPA, CPU, and memory request changes that can be employed to save up to 60% on compute costs. And the best part, it's absolutely free. Try gMaestro yourself at granulate.io/gmaestro to begin optimizing your Kubernetes today. That's granulate.io/gmaestro to begin optimizing your Kubernetes today.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. August 22 wrapping up. It's been a good month. End of the summer, if you will, for most people. I know summer technically goes on a little bit more. Got about 3 more weeks of summer, but end of summer for most people. Kids are going back to school here. For a lot of people, this next week. For myself, Monday. For Aaron and I, on Monday, our kids are going back to school. I want to talk about today's Sunday Perspective show. I want to talk a little bit about kind of a shift we see. Both obviously, in the economy, we've seen some things slowing down. We've seen some companies, slowing down, whether it's hiring or funding or, starting new projects. We've seen some of that. We've seen, the other thing that we sort of measure sometimes, we try and do two things. We try and both look at the data that's out there that gets reported and things that are measurable and so on and so forth. But then we also sort of try and look at some trends that we see as people try and make requests to come on the show. We get a lot of requests, not to humble brag, we get a lot of requests. We can only cover so many slots on the show. But one of the things that are interesting to watch is kind of the change in tone that happens in requests to come on the show. A lot of the people that come on the show or that request to come on the show, obviously from the tech industry, but it's interesting to sort of watch the tone of, how they pitch what they're talking about. And obviously we're trying to find things that are going to be interesting to you, but it's interesting to sort of watch the change in tone from, everything is sort of bullish and, everything's great to, hey, let's start talking about some things that are I don't want to say more prohibitive, but are more pragmatic, if you will. And one of the interesting kind of pitches that I've gotten quite a few of lately have been around this topic of, how are you, there's been a lot of spending in IT and a lot of spending around software and around DevOps and around different things. A lot of companies are coming back, and at least in the pitch, and I see this somewhat, is, companies coming back and saying, hey, we spend a lot of money on a lot of things. Maybe we didn't necessarily during really good times or when economic times were kind of booming or interest rates were low. We didn't necessarily always do the best job of cost justifying them because the cost of doing them was fairly low relative to a lot of things. But as interest rates go up or, perspectives on the business change, priorities change, how do we go about justifying these things? And especially if you've never necessarily gone through this justification. So what I thought I'd do today a little bit, and this show may get a little economically and accounting wise wonky. It'd be a little more about kind of counting things as opposed to the technology behind it. But I thought I'd sort of dig through how companies tend to do this when times aren't in the super boom 1% interest rate sort of things, and when things start to change, interest rates go up, and what that means from a company perspective, and what it means for your business or the people that sell to you, or you're trying to create products that you sell out to the marketplace or whatever that might be. So we're going to do that after the break. Datadog is a SaaS cloud monitoring and security platform that enables full-stack observability for modern infrastructure and applications at any scale, providing teams dashboarding, alerting, application performance monitoring, infrastructure monitoring, UX monitoring, security monitoring, and log management in one tightly integrated platform, plus 450 plus out-of-the-box integrations with technologies including cloud providers, databases, and web servers. Aggregate all your data into one platform for seamless correlation, enabling teams to troubleshoot and collaborate together in one place, preventing downtime and enhancing performance and reliability.
Get started with a free 14-day trial by visiting datadog.com/cloudcast. That's datadog.com/cloudcast. Today's show is sponsored by Lightstep Incident Response, built on the ServiceNow platform used by over 6,000 companies worldwide. Lightstep Incident Response allows you to scale your incident response team without adding to your monthly bill. With intelligent on-call scheduling and escalations, you get the full context of your service health. Lightstep Incident Response immediately pinpoints issues and uses machine learning to send group text, reducing your time to respond. And you can seamlessly orchestrate alert and incident triage with on-call scheduling across Slack, Teams, Zoom, desktop, and mobile. So get started today with a free 30-day trial of Lightstep Incident Response by visiting lightstep.com/cloudcast. That's lightstep.com/cloudcast. And get a free t-shirt after your first alert or incident.
And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to dig a little bit into, what happens, especially as the economy changes a little bit or the perspective on velocity of new projects change. How do companies go about thinking about how do we justify projects? How do we prioritize projects? I only bring this up because, as we've mentioned a bunch of times over the last probably 6 months, for a lot of people, the economy has been relatively good for the last, let's say, decade or so, to the point where, you may not have necessarily gone through a point where I'm sure you had to prioritize and justify projects, but, not gone through a time when there was a significant shift in kind of what was going on in the economy, especially around interest rates, and how that impacts the people who tend to run your company, especially from a financial perspective, how they think about whether or not new investment should be made in spaces, and how they think about measuring them and have benchmarks and baselines in terms of what's going to get accepted and not get accepted. And so I thought I would kind of walk through some scenarios in which maybe it's going to be easy to justify or not justify something, but also scenarios in which it becomes hard to sort of justify it, and hard in the sense of you're sort of going, well, but we have to do this, and somebody goes, yeah, but measure that out for me. What does that mean, right? So let's take a couple of scenarios first, and then we'll sort of walk through some of the decision-making process that leaders in the company typically have to make on a kind of a balancing between a gut feel and the actual data that's out there. So let's say, for example, you are a retail fast food restaurant, and over the last two and a half years or so, and I'll use a company like Chick-fil-A just as an example because A, at least here in the United States, it's well known, but B, there's some interesting kind of side things going on. But I think a lot of companies are going through this. But so let's say you're a fast food retail company, and beginning of the pandemic happens, and your business was doing well prior to the pandemic, so it's not like anything changed, and people still eat. People need to eat. People want to eat, and you had a mobile application prior to the pandemic starting, but the pandemic starts, and essentially your hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of stores that had an indoor seating area and an indoor counter basically had to shut down. But because of the way things work, you were still able to use the drive-through. So you go from some percentage of your capacity automatically is shut down. B, your volume of customers and interest has not shut down, and you're trying to figure out, how do I best serve these customers through the drive-through, right? So for those of you not in the United States, the drive-through is basically, think of it as, you drive your car around the side of the building, and there's a window there, and you can order your food, and then they give it to you out the window, as opposed to you going into the restaurant and them just handing it to you and you sitting down. Somewhat of a very American thing, but I know they have them in other countries. Apologize for my ignorance. I don't do a lot of fast food when I travel outside the United States. Anyways, so you're sitting there and you're going, well, we also have this mobile app, and we've never been highly, highly dependent on people ordering ahead of time. The mobile app was nice, but it wasn't kind of the cornerstone of what we did. And now all of a sudden you go, oh, well, this actually might help us, right? This might actually help us better manage order flow if we encourage more people to use the mobile app. And oh, by the way, there's a side sort of benefit that may come out of this is that if a lot more people are ordering through the mobile application, we are going to collect a lot more data than we ever did if you were going to the checkout counter, right? We're going to know personally about who you are. We're going to know about your buying habits. We're going to be able to, better use the reward system that we have in place, a whole bunch of stuff like that. And so, you think about you're trying to justify that, but all of a sudden, if let's say 10% of your business previously had gone through the mobile application, which meant, the digital infrastructure that you had on the back end of that was whatever, let's call it 10, just for number reasons. Well, if all of a sudden now your input from the mobile app is now, say, 50% of your traffic of your business, you have to be able to have a much larger percent or much larger probably spend on your digital infrastructure, because the number of requests that are coming in, it's not something that can have any sort of time lag because it's tied to the stores. There's probably some interaction between some sort of centralized capability and the franchisees who own the stores. There's a lot of sort of complexity that goes on there. And so immediately you're sort of going, well, if I'm the IT group and we get told we have to put this in place, you have to cost justify this. And you're probably going to be cost justifying it in a way that, I guess you say, well, if sales of some segment grow 50%, but the reality is you're probably not growing sales as a total number that much more, right? The number of people that are eating on a day-to-day basis, it's not like all of a sudden, and I know you can joke all you want about fat Americans, but it's not like all of a sudden the total volume of traffic due to COVID was going to grow through 3x. It was probably going to be more or less the same. It's just the volume of the digital transactions that you had associated with the business has grown 4 or 5x. And so, this is one of those scenarios where you go, well, we have to make the investments in, our API infrastructure, our mobile development, our security around things, the ways that we interact with our franchisees. But again, you're not necessarily driving a lot of net new sales, but you're also preventing a lot of frustrated customers. And so how do you justify that? How do you work out the math that says, well, part of this is a bunch of new spend, but it's not necessarily net new sales per se. I guess you could justify that as, well, we're not losing business, so it's an investment to not lose sales. Okay, well, I guess you can sort of justify that. You can justify it as it needs to be performant enough in the technology, because so much of our business is built around this customer experience, customer satisfaction. But at the same time, it's a digital interaction and digital satisfaction as opposed to what used to be a very people-centric customer satisfaction. So anyways, it's not black and white, if you will. It's not completely cut and dry as to how you would do that. And so, I think we're going to see more and more of these things where more of our business, more of our interactions on a day-to-day basis move towards more digital things, whether it's how we order food, whether it's how food is delivered, whether it's different ways that retail are happening, whether it's kiosks at stores as opposed to necessarily people at checkouts or whatever. As we all know, it's how you interact with things in your car, all sorts of stuff that are going on is justifying digital experiences, and the digital experience may drive some higher level of sales for what you're selling, but it also might displace some other part of sales, right? And so we're going to see this commonly. Another scenario that I'll throw out, so let's say you are the New York Times, right? Just as an example. But this is an easy one, again, sort of relates to COVID. People can think about it. If you are the New York Times or one of the major, media outlets that has remained viable, I know a lot of the media outlets have struggled, but like they've remained viable. Over the last couple of years, last 4 or 5 years, your business has probably significantly been up. The readership has been up because the world's been a chaotic place, whether it's because of politics or because of COVID or because of whatever. And there's a lot more people trying to become informed and learn about things. And so your business is probably up. The amount of traffic you have towards your site is up over some period of time. Okay, so that makes sense. And you can justify incremental spend because you've probably got incremental revenue coming in, and you can justify the shift maybe from print to digital and all those sort of things. But what about if you come along and you have something like Wordle happens, and there are literally hundreds of thousands, millions of people on a daily basis doing the Wordle thing, and Wordle is free. And you go, well, we bought it because it's super interactive. It sort of fits the demographic of the people that read the New York Times. It's people who, enjoy being challenged, enjoy trying to be smart, and, kind of it plays off, it's got a little bit of a play off of what goes on with the crossword puzzle and all those sort of things. But you didn't necessarily, you're not charging for it. Maybe you will down the road. Maybe you'll include it someday in the bundle with the crossword puzzle or the bee or whatever other things. But for right now, it's free. So how do you justify that, right? Because you're not driving any new revenue, right? You're not necessarily, you may be driving it, but it's also available just via the web. You don't necessarily automatically know that it comes from the New York Times. You just know that it's Wordle, right? Or you have another acquisition like The Athletic, which is they bought a sports company. And so you have a bunch of new traffic, but you also have a very different, you have a different mix of, it's still news and information, but it's not necessarily exactly like the news, right? It's different. It has a different characteristic to it. So somewhere in there, people are saying, hey, I've got these kind of things going on. I've got part of my business which I can justify because more people are reading and more people, hit the paywall and maybe they pay for it. So, okay, I get that. And then I've got this one thing over here that comes through an acquisition that is a lot of traffic. It's spiky times of the day, probably in many cases the morning part of the day, maybe not necessarily in the afternoon, although I'm sure they know that better than I would. And then you've got other acquisitions that maybe don't look exactly like the other ones, but you're trying to broaden out what you do. And all these things create scenarios in which you go, how am I justifying this stuff, right? Like it's not completely cut and dry. It's not like invest ahead of it. We know there's a known revenue stream. That revenue stream will grow the business. It's always accredited. And so the reason I bring these two sort of examples up, and there's probably literally hundreds and hundreds of them out there right now, is, when, and we've talked about this a number of times on the show, when interest rates are super low, and companies are able to borrow money at almost zero interest rates. Basically no friction whatsoever. The ability to get new projects kicked off and to work on things that need investment aren't that hard to justify because, in essence, if money was for the most part free, if you can show some sort of improvement, a lot of things get done. And a lot of times the barrier to getting them done was, well, we'd like to take on these 10 projects internally. It'd be great, and we can probably find a way to fund all of them, but we really only have people for 4 of them. And we're going to need to hire a bunch of people, or we're going to need to, whatever it might be. But, so you were sort of your own internal limitation, right? The market wasn't your limitation. And now that we see interest rates growing, let's say they're up 2x or 3x what they've been, we've seen housing prices, go up. So rates are up 4, 5, 6%. And so anyways, the reason I mention all this stuff is not that you need to be an economist, but you do need to pay attention to what interest rates look like. And the reason is when interest rates grow, essentially borrowing money becomes more difficult for your company. Not more difficult meaning the bank, is mean to you, just meaning, the bank wants more money back for the money that you borrow, right? So when that happens, what happens internally in your organization is, and most people who've never taken business classes have never heard this term, or anybody who's not taken an economics class never heard this term. But internally, what companies do, especially at the CFO level, and sometimes this trickles down to other parts of the business, is they have what's called a hurdle rate. And what the hurdle rate means, and it's a real economic term, and sometimes it's just used as a way of describing things. But in essence, it says, hey, if I'm a business and I have a bunch of extra money, right? I have some money allocated in a budget, or I have extra money because we've made more money, whatever. Essentially, you look at dozens and dozens of projects going on all the time within your organization. Some are active projects, and some are, people with new ideas. And they come along and they go, hey, I have a new idea. I would like to have something happen. And they come to the people that own the budget for it, and they say, hey, can we do this? And at some point, the people that own the budget have to figure out how to prioritize those things. They look at all the projects that are out there, and they're typically saying like, hey, justify for me why I should give you $1 million or 3 new headcount or whatever it might be. And again, when times are really good and interest rates are really low, that process, that sort of hurdle rate justification, is oftentimes kind of lax. I don't mean that it doesn't happen, but in those situations, you're going, hey, if you can just sort of prove to me that like you're going to help grow the business, and maybe marketing signs off on it, or the product organization signs off on it, or customer satisfaction signs off on it, a lot of times those things just kind of happen. But when interest rates get higher, that what happens is that hurdle rate incrementally grows higher. And the reason that hurdle rate grows higher is because the business in essence says, yes, I could make a investment in this new thing, but they also say, well, I could also just invest that money in a known financial instrument that is going to return to me some fixed amount of money, right? And so your project, we're going to kick off some new technology thing, some new digital transformation thing, some new cloud project, introduces risk. And for that risk, the finance department says, okay, well, if there's a 50-50 chance your project's going to succeed, or even an 80% chance your project's going to succeed, it's going to be somewhat less than 100%. What they want is a premium on top of taking on that risk, right? Whereas if a bank were to come to them and says, hey, give me your extra $1 million, I'll return you 5% interest, right? Or 5%, payback. In most cases, that's a no risk. And I know people are going to argue with me about, hey, inflation and blah, 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 blah. But that's kind of the thought process that goes on, and things like inflation get calculated in. So what maybe used to be, a super easy process, you're now having to justify it, right? They may be coming back to you going, our hurdle rate internally is 12% or 10% or 15% or whatever it might be. And in essence, what they're now asking you to do is say, okay, you want to kick off that project to be able to increase the capacity for infrastructure to be able to handle new transactions or new mobile applications, or that microservice implementation you want to do, but I need you to cost justify it for me. And I want you, they may never come to you directly because you're in technology and that you wouldn't necessarily understand an accounting term like hurdle rate, but that's what they're doing. They're now kind of going, hey, explain it to me, and explain it to me in probably better ways or more detailed ways than you've had before. Now, this is a weird scenario because, if you're a technologist, you go, hey, whoa, hold on, I'm not an accountant. Like, why am I being asked these things? Well, they're probably not asking you these things, right? They're probably asking somebody these things. And what you're getting is sort of the downstream effect of that. So maybe you're the IT group and sales is saying, hey, sales for your business is saying, hey, we need to make sure that the mobile application experience for people that are in the drive-through of our fast food restaurant is awesome, and it needs to be, instantaneous. And you go, okay, well, in order to do that, I'm going to have to, I'm going to have to buy this and do this. I'm going to have to invest in these people. We're going to have to put these processes in place. And so in your mind, you're going, well, somebody, I guess the chief revenue officer, chief salesperson, has already justified this. And what you'll probably begin to see more and more as, if the economy slows down a little bit or things get a little bit tighter or interest rates maybe rise a little bit more, is those people that before came back to you and just said, just do this, right? Just make the technology work, just make the digital experience better, are going to come back to you to help them justify it. And this is where, you start to get into these scenarios in which you have to not only be a technology leader, but you have to have a little bit of finance and economics background, because you have to be able to justify something. Because again, you're not necessarily justifying, hey, could we make this technology work? Hey, could I hire 3 people to make this stuff viable? But you're also having to justify the economic viability of it, because now that chief revenue officer, that chief marketing officer who wants that, that campaign to go out the door, or that better thing, they're having to go up against 10 other projects that seem equally important or equally, super exciting for the business to do things, but they have to justify them. And, this is a scenario in which, we've said a lot of times, working in the IT space is very much a technology-centric thing,
but you got to have a little bit of business smarts. You got to have a little bit of economic smarts. You got to kind of be able to follow the money. And we're going to start to get into an era in which that discussion comes up more often. And the thing to remember is nobody's necessarily saying like the technology is not relevant, but they're saying, look, given a lot of things going on, we're going to have to prioritize those things, and we're probably going to start putting a little bit different, economic rationale, accounting rationale against it. And you may sort of be surprised by that or blindsided by that because you go, wow, we've never had to do that in the past, right? So, this is one of these scenarios where, as new projects are coming on board, as you're thinking about, hey, what are we investing in? Kind of have in the back of your mind, how does this relate to the business, right? And what's it doing to the business? And again, just so you know, like some situations are going to be very obvious as to what they do to the business. So, for example, if you are a business in which part of your growth, the way that you scale and grow, is through partners. Let's say whatever. Let's say you're a credit card company, and a lot of your growth is not in necessarily your branded credit cards, but in you working with partners to have a sports branded credit card or a college branded credit card or a resort branded credit card or wherever it might be. Those kind of justifications for additional infrastructure to be able to help take on new partners probably won't be that hard to justify because you probably have internal numbers that say, hey, as we grow number of partners, that adds X amount of incremental revenue at this rate, given whatever. But if it's coming back and saying, we need to do this thing because more and more of our customers have shifted from in-store to digital experience, but the overall revenue may not necessarily grow, sort of like the fast food example I used. That may not be as simple to understand, and that may be something that the broader people that are asking this request have to be able to justify, like, okay, what does the store cost? What are the people in the store cost? What happens if we shift to more mobile engagement? Well, what happens, are we in a business that requires delivery of those things? Okay, what a delivery cost. So just sort of know that, not every one of these is going to be as cut and dry as it might seem, or maybe been in the past. But you're probably going to see more and more of this, and this is sort of the framework that people are using. And I've gone on for a while now. I don't want to tie up too much time, but just sort of be prepared, ask questions. What is this doing for our business? What is the shift? Have we thought through? Is this something that is directly about growth? Is this about taking costs out of the system? Is this about shifting kind of digital experience for people? And just know that probably each one of those buckets, whether it's known growth, cost reduction, or shifting the digital experience, are probably going to have different ways of measuring themselves, and you're probably going to be involved with all three of those kinds of projects. And some of them will be harder to justify than others, and so it's good to not only understand how that process is going to work, but also probably to start thinking of some sort of plan Bs if the things that you're doing, you're like, boy, that seems really like a good thing to do, but it also seems like a really hard thing to justify. At least we're not sure what the outcome of this thing's going to be. We think it's going to make things better. We think it's going to improve something, but maybe have a little bit of plan B in place in which you go, okay, this is the gold platinum way of doing this. This is the sort of silvery bronze way of doing this. And this is the duct tape and bubblegum, way of doing this, because you may get asked to do more of the duct tape and bubblegum ones, at least in the early days. So again, all this is not intended to give you a PhD in economics or accounting or any of those things. This is just kind of giving you a sense of like some of the trends that we're seeing. And again, this is for anybody who's been in the industry for a long time. You go, oh man, I've seen this before. I've seen us go through these cycles. But if you're newer to the industry, and again, if you've really only been in the industry for 7, 8, 9, 10 years, you may not have necessarily seen these cycles, or at least seen them, what we're probably going to see in the next couple of years as the economy kind of adjusts from a lot of years of boom to a lot more years of sort of justification and pragmatism and so forth. And people make decisions accordingly, right? It doesn't mean everything stops. It just means they make decisions differently. So anyways, with that, I'll wrap it up. Thanks everybody for listening. Hopefully this made a little bit of sense. Always happy to answer questions about this stuff, but something to sort of educate yourself on around this space. And we always tell folks like it's good to be as good about the technology as you can, but it's also good to have just enough economics background, a little bit of accounting background, because at some point, technology always involves spending money and people wanting to justify why that money is spent. We don't just get to spend money on technology all the time just because the business exists. So anyways, with that, we're going to wrap it up. Hope everybody's been having a good August, getting ready for school to start for a lot of people and getting into the fall and fall season and fall trade show season and a lot of new announcements coming that way. So anyways, thanks to everybody for listening. Another fun Sunday perspective. Thanks for telling a friend about the show. We continue to see the show grow. It kind of blows us away that year over year, we continue to see the show grow and new people joining on. So thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for helping us grow the community. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.